In this walkthrough, I'll show you a social network API. It will consist of the backend routes of a MongoDB, Express, and Node application that isn't connected to a front-end framework at the moment. To give a brief introduction to how the API will work, it will consist of models for users and their thoughts. Each user will have a list of friends, and each thought will have a list of reactions. To get started, I'll go ahead and start my server. Now that we know my server is started, I'll move over to Insomnia. Um, as you can see, if I use my read all users API call, we have an empty array. So there aren't any users set up. Yet. Let's create a couple of users. We'll start with Bobby1, and his email is bobby1@mail. So we can see that this is the response. Let's add Bobby2. We can see that this is the response. It's different from the first one because we have Bobby2. If we read all of our users, now we have two users, Bobby1 and Bobby2. If I want to search for a user by their ID, I need to use this ID with underscore ID as the key, and use the read a user by ID request. So I enter that user ID here in the URL, and then the response is the information for Bobby2. So we were able to search for a user by their specific ID. If I want to update a user, let's update user number 1, which is Bobby1. Let's update that user. So we'll use that user's ID. We'll call this user John, and their email will be john@mail. So now we can see that there's a user named John. If I read all users one more time, we see that we have John and Bobby2. So the first user was updated with the previous request. Let's say I want to delete a user. I would need the ID again. Let's delete user by ID and enter that user's information, that user's ID here in the URL. This response is just the response with the information that was deleted. If we go back to read all users and refresh, we see that John is no longer one of the users, but Bobby2 is still a user. Let's add Bobby1 back into our user list. So now we have two users. To add a friend to a user, we need to take the ID of the user and the ID of the friend, because we'll add this ID into the friends array for that user. So let's do that now. We'll add Bobby2 to the friends list of Bobby1. So Bobby1 will enter his information in our URL. Then the API call requires the friends keyword here. Then we need the ID of Bobby2 as the friend ID that we'll be adding. So now we see that Bobby1 has an additional entry. Now we see that Bobby1 has an additional entry in their friends list array, and that ID corresponds to the ID of Bobby2. At this time, the API call only works one way. So Bobby1 at this time isn't a friend in Bobby2's friend list. but we can always add that later. To delete a friend from a user, we'll do a similar action where we take uh, Bobby1's ID and put that in the URL. Then we add friends, and since it's a delete method, we will be deleting Bobby2 from the friend list. Now we see that Bobby1 is updated and has an empty friends list. So the friend was removed from this user. So that covers all of the user routes. Let's look at the thought routes now. For our thought routes, we can see that there are no thoughts in our database at the moment. To create a thought, we need to enter the user ID that we want to add a thought for, of the user that we want to add a thought for. And then in the body, we add thought text and the user's name. We can see that once we send that request, the user, Bobby1, has added a thought into the thought array. Let's add one more. Let's add something like hello sun under the same user. We can see that we have another thought in the thoughts array. If we want to read all of the thoughts, we can see here that we have two thoughts. One was hello world and the other is hello sun, both of them for the Bobby friend, or for the Bobby user. If we want to find a thought by its ID, we just enter the ID in the URL and we find that hello world thought. If we want to update a thought, we would need that thoughts, let's update hello sun. Well, we need that thought ID. Let's update the thought by entering the ID in the URL. And the new thought text is going to be hello Mars. And we see that Bobby now has a thought text of hello Mars. And to double check that, we can find all the thoughts one more time. And now this thought has an updated text. If we want to delete a thought, we would need the user ID of the user ID of the user whose thought we want to remove, and then the ID of the thought itself. So let's go to the hello Mars thought, enter that into the URL, but then we also want to make sure we're updating this, we're deleting this thought from the right user. So it's the Bobby1 user. And now we see that Bobby only has one thought. We read all the thoughts again. Bobby only has one thought now. So we deleted the user. So we deleted the thought. Now, if we want to create a reaction by a user on a thought, we have this put route where in the URL we have API thoughts, and then the thought that we want to update, we have to enter its ID in the URL. So let's react to the hello world thought. Then in the URL, we enter reactions. And in the body of our request, we'll have the reaction body is here is my first reaction, and it's going to be by Bobby2. Now we can see under the Bobby1 user, from the Bobby1 user, the thought text is hello world. So that's the right thought that we were reacting to. And this thought now has reactions, a reaction array that added the information from this reaction. So our reaction was, here is my first reaction, and now here's my first reaction is in the reactions array for this thought. Let's add another one. Here's my second reaction. You can see that the reaction array is updated where this new reaction is added to the array for this thought. Now let's try to delete one of the reactions. Say we want to delete this second reaction. We will first need its reaction ID. Actually, we will first need the thought ID because that goes into the URL. Then reactions. Then we enter the word reactions. And then the create reaction URL requires the specific reaction ID of the reaction that we're deleting. So in our URL, we have API thoughts, the ID of the thought that we're removing, that we're adjusting, then the reactions keyword, then the specific reaction ID that we are removing. So now we see that the Bobby1 thought of hello world only has one reaction in its reactions array. So now if we go back to read all the users, we see that we have Bobby2 with no thoughts and no friends. Bobby1 with one thought that says hello world and a reaction to that thought, which is here is my first reaction by Bobby2. And then in addition, Bobby1 has a short list of friends that includes the ID of Bobby2. So there you have it, the backend for a social networking app, including all the APIs for users and thoughts. Thanks for watching.